الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. All right, let's stop. Class, how do we acquire knowledge, right? Any questions about anything we covered last time? I know you were. You were here last time. Okay. Should we start 5 minutes with the previous questions or can they wait? Sure. Okay. No worries. So, how do we acquire knowledge? How do we know things? What do we use to know things? Yeah, let's get. How do we know? No, we don't know things. We participate a lot. Let's give someone else. How do we get to know? Aql is one, okay. What other? So what's an obvious one? Yeah, for you it's one. What's one you can actually use? Like with any, no one's going to doubt that, right? So from source, okay. So divine intervention, divine knowledge, right? So Allah Subhanahu wa Taala sending a messenger. That's one way. You said Aql, that's another way. What's the third one? Sure. Is this better? It's better, but I think when I turn this way, it goes a little. It shouldn't matter? Okay. Yeah. I'm saying something. We're good? Okay. All right. So, yeah. So, Aql was one. You said religious divine intervention, right? So, Allah sending something. What's the third one? What's another one? None? You guys are in a university. What is like, that should have, like, something else should have been number one. Yeah. Our cognitive facilities, like our cognitive faculties. What are those? Seeing. Seeing is believing. Yeah. What else? Seeing, hearing, taste, smell. That's number one. Yeah. Huh? Eating, thinking. Yeah, so thinking will be akal. So thinking will be rational, right? Intellectual. Yeah. So those are the three ways we acquire knowledge, right? Those are the three ways we acquire knowledge. So cognitive faculties being top. I don't know how it ended up with how it ended up at the bottom. Top, and then rational, right? Being able to make sense of things, and then um, divine, the divine, right? Or being informed of something, right? Being informed. We're calling it the divine. Yeah. Research and testimony would fall into the cognitive, the sensory. Yeah, because stuff that we can actually observe, see, evaluate, right? Uh, that's where we'll fall. So those are the three ways. We go to the next slide. I think that's what it was, right? So sensory faculties, rational, and being informed by a trusted source, i.e., in our case, divine. Go to the next one. So the next one is also related to the first category, right? So how do we conclude something? How do we assert something? How do we make a statement? How do we, like, even when we hypothesize, right? It all goes back to the same thing. Those same three ways of knowing, right? So we have the empirical, right? We have the empirical judgment. So what's an empirical judgment? What's a customary judgment you can think of? Sure, I'll let you. Correct. What's another one? If there's smoke on the other side of the building, we can assume there is a fire. So that's a customary thing, right? What else is, when I say customary, it's more like things that we've gotten used to knowing about, right? Um, if you light a match, if you if you if you light a cigarette, what's going to happen? It's going to burn, right? If you set something that is conducive to fire, if you set that thing in a fire, what's going to happen? It's going to get into fire and it's going to burn. If you stab yourself, you're going to hurt yourself, right? These are things. How do we know these things? Does a baby come out of the womb and that baby knows? No, correct. So it's through, like, how does a baby realize that if he lets go and falls, that he's going to hurt himself or hurt himself? Mere pure experience. That's it, right? Until it happens, he or she doesn't know. The baby doesn't know, right? Uh, so that's what that goes back to. That's what that connects to. What else? What about the rational? Yes. Sure. Okay. Fair. Fair. Correct. Yes. It's customary, not rational, right? In a social context, we use the word rational for a lot of different things. Like, come on, this is so rational. You don't believe in this, right? Like, you get my point, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean the argument itself is rational, right? If the sky goes gray, it's gonna rain. We observe clouds and we observe certain situations in the past that tells us that this is what happens when the sky turns like that, and then based on that, we can infer that it's probably going to happen, right? And because it happens so uh, accurately in the sense that it happens enough times that we have made an association, right? So the association is like what? If something is present, something else is present. Or if something is present, something else is absent. Or if something is absent, something else is like that's basically the connections that we have learned to make. You have a question? Yeah, sure. Okay. Okay. Fair. Yeah. Cause and effect is not necessary. But cause and effect is necessary for us to operate in the world, right? Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot later, actually. But we're sort of here still. As we observe connections around us based on how things fall according to everything else, right? So hence the gray sky thing would be gray sky equals rain, right? Yeah. Just like the smoke equals fire, that kind of analogy. Okay. Then there's the rational way that so rational judgments are what? 1 plus 1 equals 2. 1 plus 1 equals, right? Someone going to argue with you on that? 1 plus 1 equals 3. Okay. Uh, that's a rational conclusion, right? Rational conclusion. Um, what could be another rational conclusion? That's, that's a big heart. I think, therefore I am. Yeah. That's still customary or observational. How do you know apples are good for you? Correct. So hence it's the first step. Hence it's the first step. Okay. Okay. Religious. What's a religious judgment? Allah's one's not a religious judgment. The religious judgment will be salat is wajib. Salah is farz. That's a religious hukum. That's a religious conclusion, religious judgment. It can be both. Metaphysical can be both. Religion might come with metaphysical arguments as well. Yeah, so religious texts would use that argument, but still using a rational argument. Yeah. Anything going into the details of the afterlife. But to have a rational afterlife, yeah, maybe not. You're right. You're right. So that will go into religion. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next one. So we'll delve into the rational one. Rationally, we look at things in three different ways, right? They're either possible, which is most things, right? Possibility, or they're either impossible, or they are necessary. Okay. What's Let's start with impossible. What's impossible? What's impossible rational? Yes. Go ahead. Okay. Some what? Correct. So what's an example? Sorry? A married bachelor is an example of okay. Sure. Married bachelor. Is that rationally impossible? Sure. Okay. I'll accept that. Okay. What else? I'll have to think about that. Okay. Sure. Okay. Okay. Let's not get there yet. Yeah. What's something else you can think of? This is a very okay. So in the concept of God, in the concept of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a very simple one. That's one like right in front of you. They cannot be other than one. Cannot be two gods. Right? The way we attribute at the attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or a God, the way we understand the God, right? In Islam, the way we understand the concept of God completely negates the possibility of any other God. Right? But other religions fall into it because the way they categorize God or the way they talk about God, it leaves room for, right? So the way we understand God is impossible for it to be affected, right? Just by the way we define Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or just speaking to anyone, God. Okay, here's a nice one. Everything that exists either moves or doesn't. There's no, it's not, it's impossible for something to be stagnant and not in movement or in movement. And not and in movement. It's impossible to be free of both. Everything that exists in creation either moves or doesn't move. How so? Okay? Yeah. You know, Is that because it's too quick, or is that? So being in two places at once is usually framed as a rational impossibility. But what about either in movement or not in movement? Everything that exists either is in movement or is not in movement, or changes between the two. That's fair. What I'm saying is, if it's between movement or no movement, right? So if constantly moving, it would be in movement, right? Or never moving would be in no movement. Or some things might be moving, like us, and then sometimes we're not moving. But it's within these three things. It cannot be free of all three of them. Can you have movement? Can you have a lack of movement and a lack of no movement at the same time? No. Okay. Yeah. Hmm. Correct. But what I'm saying is, it still fits the framework because it's either in motion or in not in a state of motion. Yeah. So yeah. So it cannot be like both moving and not moving, and it cannot be free of both of these situations. Does that make sense? Like it's like saying you have two options. There's no third. That's that's the point I'm making. Okay? So it cannot be free of both movement and free of lack of movement. It's either one. Okay, so that's like an impossibility. Okay, what's a possibility? Possibilities are it can either happen, not happen, exist, not exist, right? What's a possibility in the case of this discussion? What's possible? What do you think? Yeah, buying time to think. No, but in the case of movement or no movement. Yeah, so it could be either in movement or not in movement. That's a possibility, right? So that's still movement. They both fall into movement. Okay. Okay. All right. What about necessary? Necessary. What's necessary? Yeah. Anybody online? We described impossible, we described possible, and then we're describing what's absolutely necessary. Obviously, in the context of Islam, in the context of us, we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is absolutely, it's impossible. We say it's impossible to not have a God, right? I.e., it's absolutely necessary to have a God. Does that make sense? What else is something that's necessary? What about being in this creation without taking up any volume? Human beings in creation without any volume. That's important, right? Spirits don't count. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So no, no, we're not talking in the sense of existence necessarily. That existence won't be possible. We're talking about things that are just has to be necessary. Sure. Yeah, yeah. If you want to define it like that. Okay, so we can say 1 plus 1 2 is a necessary conclusion. Okay? We have two things. We have two things. That one thing plus that one thing equals the sum of those one and one equals two. Necessary conclusion. What's law of identity? Okay. Then you have the sum of parts. Is that fair? Fair. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Because even whatever you're assigning the number one to, it's still a sum of parts technically in and of itself. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Any questions? What's the next slide on this? Okay. Okay. So the way we're defining impossibilities, possibilities, necessary things, right? Does that not allude to a reality that's subjective to some extent, right? It alludes to a reality that's subjective to some extent, right? Contrary to what we are sometimes kind of taught, even philosophers, like they would, like I'm even talking about non-Muslim philosophers, they spend lifetimes trying to figure out what is objective reality, right? So in the case of what the sister was saying about how she thinks, which is why that she is, right? Where's that coming from? Who's it coming from? Whose statement is that? Descartes, yes. And what was he trying to do? He was trying to get down to the most granular level of objectivity, right? And he's kind of coming from a point of skepticism, right? Everything can be doubted. Everything can be doubted. But the very fact that I'm doubting means that I'm thinking, that establishes the fact that me as a thinker exists, right? That's what it was is going back to. Um, what about Kant as well, right? So Kant had this understanding of nominal and phenomenal, right? Nominal being the things as they are, and phenomenal being what we can observe cognitively, right? Uh, and then he ends up acknowledging an objective reality. It says there is an objective reality, but our abilities to try to understand it is all subjective, right? So this has a huge effect on our society today, right? Although today it's almost walking away from objective reality sometimes. Right? Okay, excellent. Yes, correct. So he still argued that objective moral laws can still be known through practical reason. Objective moral laws. So this is where the universal morality, a lot of this comes from, right? That when it comes to morality, we can actually have an objective opinion on things, right? Um, but it's almost like a necessary thing for us. You understand what I'm saying? So it's almost like a necessary thing. What does that mean? Uh, for law, for human law to be cohesive, comprehensive, for it to work, for it to be coherent, This is the necessary assumption that needs to happen, that when it comes to morality, we do have the objective ability to reach objective law. So it's almost, I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but it's almost like discussing with somebody, making the argument that why is it that we have an objective stance when it comes to murder, when it comes to rape, when it comes to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but then we don't have an objective stance when it comes to, let's say, gender, right? So they will argue back saying that objective stances on things like murder is a necessary assumption that we have to operate. So it's almost like, okay, so we're just kind of playing along because otherwise societies will fall apart. Okay? And this is a discussion I actually had with someone who was telling me exactly that, oh, those are because that's necessary. Okay? Yeah. Okay. What was the answer? Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems like they're kind of we're picking and choosing, right? We're picking and choosing, and because society, you cannot really structure laws in society without accepting a set of moral values. It's kind of like a necessary evil for them. That's again, this is my argument. I don't know if Kantians actually make that argument, but this is how it comes off when you speak. Yeah, yeah. So it's a necessary evil. Yeah, and so it's you can almost argue it's inconsistent. Sorry, not argue. It is inconsistent at the end of the day. It is inconsistent, right? And who gets to choose where do you have objectivity? Like you're choosing now that we have objectivity when it comes to this, but then not this. That's just now your opinion versus mine. Okay, let me go to the next slide. Obviously, for Muslims, we do believe in objectivity in every single aspect of our of existence, right? It's objective truth. So even when we have fiqh and when discussions of fiqh, what's fiqh? Jurisprudence, right? Things that don't affect your theology. We still believe that there's one truth, right? But differences of opinions are allowed. That doesn't necessarily mean they're all true. You can make the argument that they might be all forgiven, they're all accepted because, right? But to make the case that they're all true, then we're falling into the same issue. All right. So why is Western society so turned off from religion? What do you think? Yes, go ahead. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Interesting point. So this, you'll see why this question is important. Okay. This might feel like a waste of time to ask, but yeah, go ahead. Okay. So they found materialism and they ditched religion. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Okay, sure. You're thinking now. Think hundreds of years ago. Okay. What's wrong with that? We have Tunisia issues happening in our history as well. In fact, within Sunnis, we have so many wars, Sahabas fighting each other. Is it just corruption of the Catholic Church? Okay. Yeah. So think about why was there a why was there a need to separate church with state? At what point did that come? Like what followed after that? Medieval Europe. How was medieval Europe? Posh, nice. Okay. That has something to do with it for sure, but that wasn't that. That's not the strongest reason of why they've sort of moved away from religion quite fast. Is it fair to make the assumption that Western society took off after they ditched religion, after they separated from their church and state in the context of 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, French Revolution, etc.? Is it fair to make that assumption, to make that argument, right? Okay, so what do you think is happening there? Is it fair to say that Western civilization started to take off and be very successful in scientifically everything after they separated church? Yes and no. Why no? Hmm. Okay. So, but it's not Christianity that they're benefiting. It's Eastern source. So correct. So enlightenment came after the separation of church and state. Why? Because they couldn't make sense of Christianity, the feudal system, the Catholic Church. You can put a lot of different things on that list. They couldn't make sense of this with progress in society, science, right? So their progress comes after they ditch the church. Is that the true for Muslims? Is it true for Muslims? For us, the height of our so-called golden ages is also where our scholars, a lot of our scholars are flourishing at the same time, correct? So there's a difference in experience between the Christian experience versus the Muslim experience. Hence, this is something that it's worth highlighting, right? That this is why Western world in general is very. This is how the church and state being separated. This idea comes from because it's almost like religion was holding them back, right? Whether it actually was or not, that's a different. That's for another day. But that is the sentiment. right? But for the Muslims, you look at how we can make the argument that our religion, as religion first, our dunyawi uh, experience is also first. Andalus being one, right? The Ottoman Empire, right? They were very successful, and also you see the scholars of the empire, their works are still preserved. It's still being active. In Tafsir al-Qurtubi, you've all heard of it, right? Where did Qurtubi live? Cordoba, okay, sure, right? He was he was he was living at a time when Spain was falling, right? There's a famous story of him running away, and that ayah in Surah Yasin that he kept reciting. Um, I forget that if you want to open up it's in the first page. Um, and he, as he recites it, they're looking for him. They go right by him. They don't see him. Right? I'll find you the ayah. وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمْ um, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْ بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ سَدًّا وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ سَدًّا. We put in front, in between their eyes, a barrier, and from behind them, barrier, okay? And they couldn't see, right? That's the verse that he kept reciting in Al-Qurtubi. It's on the first page. It is the ninth verse. Okay. Anyway, that's a side point. Our our progress didn't happen in spite of religion. Our progress happened with the religion. Right? At a time when the religious sciences were strong. Right now, religious sciences is not that strong. I mean, that's something we can agree on, right? If you look at the madrasa system around the world, if you look at universities, there's a lot of things happening. It's not. This is not even something anyone would argue about. If you look at the Ottoman curriculum, uh, the 10-year or 8-year curriculum and all the books they'll study, and again, this is not like full-time job and studying. That's what they were doing full-time. And they were funded by the government, right? So imagine coming out of one of those 10-year programs. It's not like a university program now. You were living in those seminaries full-time. Right? You don't get to go back home, right? Which we try to imitate here and there, and we've adapted it to 4-year degrees, but they don't come close to anything that we had in the past, which is why you can technically have PhDs in multiple topics, but you're very laser focused. Like say Islamic studies, if you study abroad, you've become a generalist first, right? So you have to study everything at a basic level, right? And then you kind of study everything again at an intermediate level, and then maybe you specialize. The way universities work now is that you don't necessarily become a generalist. You just kind of touch upon a bunch of topics, and then you pick something, you become really specialized in that. That's if you become specialized in that. But then your grasp on the other sciences are not quite there unless you are constantly filling those gaps, right? So there's a serious lack of how scholarship even happens, right? But going back to this point, this is why they're so turned on by religion. This is why the sentiment is there. For us, the sentiment didn't need to be there. For us, this sentiment happened because we followed them in their footsteps, right? What I mean to say by that is that in our countries, or back home, right, there's this idea of, oh, religion is going to make us backward is a very new concept. It's very new. It's copying that sentiment in the West. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think deeper than that, more than that, maybe that was the case, but more than that, it's the fact that they could not reconcile Christianity with reality. All those. I mean, at the root of it is the Trinity concept, for example, right? It's very difficult to, right? That's why, like, you can speak to a lot of these guys and they'll just say, you just have to believe, right? You have to accept, right? There's no real answer that they'll give you for this 2 to 1, right? Uh, so the best thing that you'll see online, for example, that they'll come back with, because these videos are everywhere. I can actually talk about it. There's public. It's not like I'm opening something for you that you won't have to access. There's a debate online, or there's a video online of a Christian asking someone that, oh, so you guys accuse us of creator entering creation. Um, so it's like, yeah, yeah. He's like, oh, what about this verse, or the hadith of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming down in the last third of the night? And he got stuck because he was from a particular strand of Sunni Islam that believes that Allah physically comes down in a manner that befits himself. So he parrots the same statement that, oh, Allah comes down in a manner that befits himself, right? He's like, bro, you're saying Allah comes down, right? Is that what, right? But the majority of our Sunni scholarship never understood that verse to mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala physically coming down, because rationally it doesn't make any sense. In fact, uh, within the Arabic language, you can actually understand the verse in a different way, right? As in His mercy coming down, as power coming down, etc., etc. Right? So you don't have to go there, right? But that's like one of the best arguments I've seen Christians coming back at. But even then, you're like picking on a fringe opinion of a religion and trying to bring it down, right? That's not really a strong argument. So they really don't have something to kind of get away from the argument other than attacking another religion, saying, well, you guys believe the same. You haven't quite fixed the problem in your own house. It's like saying your house is burning, and you respond, well, there's a fire in your house too, in that room. Right? But you haven't put the fire out in your house yet, right? You're just kind of playing that game. So this idea of being turned off by religion, especially in the Muslim countries, right, where this sentiment that religion makes us backward, or religion isn't allowing us to progress, it's a very post-colonial mindset, right? It's a very post-colonial mindset, and it's kind of it's taking from that same tradition of the West that, look, they succeeded when they left religion behind, right? And we probably have to do the same thing. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So we're already claiming that our scholarship today is much weaker than those times, right? Uh, so this is already what we're claiming. So we're not claiming that our Muslim nations today are superior in any way, but the claim is that for us, we make the claim that it's it's again, to be fair, Allah can Allah success and non-success, whatever failure, all comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? You can do everything that is right, but then success might not come until a different time, right? But it is a fact that from a scholarship perspective, our golden era did did correspond with scholarship being at a high level in those in those uh, in those kingdoms that we're referring to, and it doesn't quite correlate now, because you see the level of poor scholarship, for example, because you see Western academia kind of in some ways helping us sometimes in the research that they're doing with in Islamic studies, right? So colonization in general, you can also make the argument has weakened our society. Yeah, you can make that. Yeah. Okay. So and also in Christianity, there's this overwhelming sentiment that religion's sort of beyond the mind. Religion's beyond the rationality. Right? You just have to kind of feel it, believe it, and then you'll see the fruits of it, right? Uh, look at the way they talk about miracles, for example, right? It's almost like everything's running, right? It's like the world is running like a domino effect, and then a miracle happens, God interferes, right? In Christianity, it's almost like when there's a gap, when something cannot be explained, that's when the God argument comes in, right? Whereas the way we approach everything in creation is in a way that Allah is basically controlling everything, right? He doesn't just we don't just say, look, it's Allah when it's a miracle. For us, everything is Allah controlling, which is why when there is a miracle, for us, it's not really a miracle. Hence, so everything that we see cause and effect in terms of relationships, we believe that Allah is the one who creates that cause and effect, right? The cause itself doesn't create the effect. Because if the cause itself created the effect, then the effect will always be the same. But if cause doesn't create the effect, but Allah is the one who creates both the cause and the effect, then the effect might not follow a cause. There could be rationally instances where the effect is different from what it should have been from the same cause, right? And that's where the whole idea of I'm sure you've heard about it. Does fire burn, or does the knife cut, or is Allah that burns, or is it Allah that cuts, right? The famous discussion on Ibrahim alayhi salam being thrown in the fire, but then the fire doesn't burn, right? So if fire intrinsically burned, then Ibrahim alayhi salam would have burned. But because fire does not intrinsically burn, but Allah is the one who causes the fire to burn, this incident of Ibrahim alayhi salam, for him the fire being cool, right, is a miracle, sure, but for us it's not that big of a deal. From a Christian context, it would have been, look, this is God doing. It's like that's the only time God enters the discussion. Yes, correct. It's from all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, yeah. So the Christians are always about like, look, this is God, for example. So where for us, it could be scientifically explainable, and for us, it's still done by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Customary judgment. Correct. Correct. Yeah. Okay. So what is our approach in response to this? Our approach is that we claim that Islam, a true religion is not in opposition of the rationality. Okay? It doesn't oppose rationality. It doesn't oppose the rational mind. Otherwise, it cannot be true. Okay? True religion agrees with rationality. Okay? And this is Allah has created the mind is, as you know, Ashraf al-Makhluqat. It's one of the more honorable creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How can it be that Allah, one of the most honorable creations of Allah, now contradicts with His true religion? It doesn't make any sense, right? For us, the mind has a very high place. It doesn't contradict. Religion can never contradict the mind, okay? In fact, we believe, okay, and this is as a rational set of premises, that for you to understand the religion, for you to interpret the religion, okay? Let's say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the book, and it's standing right in front of you. Okay? You understanding that book is still through what? through the mind, right? So how can it be in a contradictory term ever, right? If you need the aql to be sound for you to understand the revelation, then the revelation and the aql cannot be in any sort of or any form of contradiction. Okay. Okay. What's the next slide? We can open up for questions for like five minutes. Sure. On the point of aql, yes. Okay. Okay. I think that's a fair argument. So your question was, why would, if you believe in God, why would God send a religion that you cannot even understand and comprehend? So yeah, legit argument. What you said there is a legit argument. Yeah. God is beyond, sure, but God is still communicating to you with aspects of the creation, with a language that is part of the creation within the time and space, right? And now to make the argument that just because he's out of this creation, his communication is incomprehensible, is almost like going against his perfection, saying that he's unable to communicate, right? Correct. Yeah. Yeah. It's almost saying that God cannot communicate in intelligible ways, right? Just because he's God, which makes no sense, like from his perfection, because we're not saying this is not a discussion of something from the outside of creation coming into the creation. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala communicating again through his messenger who is from you. Why? Right? Why were messengers from humans? Why not from creatures? Right? To be relevant, to be familiar. Right? What's the whole point of language if you can't be familiar? Right? So it doesn't hold up. Any other questions on the group? Okay. Sure. Okay. Sure. So in the case of Descartes, he starts off from a point of skepticism, okay, doubting everything, surrounding everything, so doubting everything, and then he establishes that the very fact that he can doubt is a proof that he can think, right? The fact that someone can doubt is a proof that there's a thinker that exists. So he's trying to basically, at a granular level, prove his own existence, and he's doing that by doubting everything. But the very fact that he can doubt is the most granular thing that he comes down to, saying that the fact that I can doubt, this is why. This proves the existence of me as a thinker. So I think, therefore I am. That's where it comes from. Okay. The issue about Kant that we talked about was that he talks about how there is a nominal world, okay, where things are as they are, i.e., this is a pen, right? It is actually a pen in reality. And then he talks about the phenomenal, which is our cognitive abilities to understand this reality. And he says that there is one reality, but we can only understand that through our subjective understanding, right? Which means it's all subjective. We don't have the ability to learn to understand objective reality. But in the case of morals, he says that human beings have the ability to rationally and practically land on right answers or right morality. Okay, so that's inconsistent. There's an inconsistency there, right? And it's almost as if he accepts it as a necessary, I don't want to say necessary evil, but like a necessary set of things that we absolutely have to accept, otherwise society breaks it. Does that make sense? It's almost like saying, if you try to argue with someone and say, you agree that murder is bad, right? We can objectively agree, and their response is, yeah, but we're forced to agree that murder is bad because otherwise society is going to go chaotic, right? So is it really a true set of morality? Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't discount Kantian philosophy as like um, something we can cover in 30 minutes and defeat kind of thing in an argument. Like this is when you get to the nitty gritty of it, these methodologies or these ideas do get very deep. Was that the question? That was the question, right? Okay, cool. Okay, sure. Yeah. So maybe judgment was not the right word to use. Um, assertion. What would be the right word to use if we say that prayer is obligatory? Right? Ruling. Yeah. So ruling will be a religious ruling. Yeah. Would it apply to a rational ruling? Maybe. Maybe. Right? So prayer is obligatory. That's a religious ruling. 1 + 1 = 2 is a rational ruling. Right? If there's smoke, there's got to be fire. Or if there's a if there are clouds, it's gonna rain. That's a observational rule, customary observation. No, so that's only rational. That was a subset of rational things. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if I added this slice to this. Um, okay. So go to the cause and effect one. Yeah. So this is our starting point sometimes, but it may not be your starting point with anyone when you're discussing Islam, right? So I think one of you were telling me, was it the last time or the time before, how someone in an engagement where someone already believes in God and you're talking about the Kalam cosmological argument, right? What is the point of that, right? If someone already believes in a higher power, a higher being, then you don't have to worry about talking to them about cause and effect. This person already understands cause and effect, right? But people that might be more on the atheist side of things, that's when this becomes relevant, right? And a lot of things, to be honest, that we've spoken about so far, applies to the whole atheist discussion versus speaking to a Christian, correct? Maybe the Trinity aspect and stuff, that's more rational discussion. A lot of times, you're never going to, and I know we start off with a lot of rational arguments, right? Part of it is also kind of fortifying our understanding of the religion, right? That's what it is. Fortifying our understanding of the religion, because the stronger you are in your understanding of the parameters of how we're operating in, it's easier for you then go out and engage, right? Otherwise, these are some of those things that, as like a checklist, we kind of go through it. These are not things that you start off with in a discussion with someone, right? A devout Christian already believes in God. You don't have to take them through cause and effect, right? You can dismantle other areas of their belief, for example, like what they might say, using some of this. You're not going to use some of it. And to be very honest, most people, if you convince them rationally, they're not going to become Muslim. It's really just not how it works, right? And you can ask new Muslims that have converted, you can ask them, like, what led you? Like, what happened? You always notice that it's a combination of some rational, some feelings-based, some observational, right? Uh, and almost always, there's that I always hear, and I have a friend who recently became Muslim. You always hear, well, I knew these Muslims. I grew up with these Muslims, and I knew how they were, and I knew what I was hearing in my family is not true. Right? That personal interaction, having Muslim friends, seeing Muslim communities, maybe walking into a mosque, these things always have a big effect. They always have a big effect. Think about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how these people, being people who don't believe in Allah, for example, when they are in the middle of the sea, they call out to Allah. Right? When they're in the middle of the sea, they call out to Allah in the middle of the storm. But then when they make it back home in the land, and when they make it back to land, they forget about Allah subhanahu. A lot of it's kind of like that. Right? When we live we're living in a time where, like you mentioned, it's a pretty decent living situation for most people, right? Sure, there's poverty, but there's no threat to life, right? There's no real threat to life. You don't have to go out and hunt. You're not exposed to danger like maybe previous nations were, right? So there's a sense of ease. There's a sense of, right? So unless people hear that fear for their life, and this is why bringing death into the picture kind of helps you get this conversation, make this conversation more serious, then they're not going to care, right? Until that happens. So it's not always rational. I've never heard of anyone coming and becoming a Muslim because, oh, it just rationally made sense, bro. I don't know if you have. I have never. Okay, it's always going to be a combination, right? Rational stuff you need to know so you can clear out some of the more, you know, some of the more like zahir and some of the more ridiculous things that they might make. But then for you to now, you have to also now convince them that Islam is the true religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Sure, yeah. Yeah. There has to be that human interaction, there has to be, right? A person can read a book on Islam, it can have all the rational arguments. Are they going to convert? Is the rational enough to convince them? And I would argue it isn't. Because until you bring in the takhweef of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talking about the day of judgment, talking about the punishment of the grave, talking about, right? And you see the Prophet ﷺ, when he first comes out, right? He doesn't rationally try to engage, right? What's one of the first things he says, right? If I told you that behind this wadi, there's an army about to come and kill you, are you guys going to believe me? Yes, of course we'll believe you. You're a sadiq al-amin. That's how he starts. He gets that takhweef, right? So that now, then he warns them about what? Allah's fire, the day of judgment. That if you don't accept the message that I'm about to tell you about, then you will end up in the fire. There has to be that urgency for them to accept Islam. It's not nearly enough, to be convinced of Islam. In fact, a lot of people, I have met someone who has told me that I think Islam is the closest to the truth. But that's all there is to it. That person hasn't accepted Islam, right? They have an interest in religion, right? They know there's a lot of gaps in Christianity. It didn't make sense to them. They grew up in a Christian environment. They studied the Quran. I think Islam is the closest thing to the truth, right? But there's no urgency. And how do I even build that urgency in a professional environment, in a colleague environment, right? you're going to fire, you're going to hell, you gotta accept it now. Right? You can't do that. That arrangement. So you need to bring that into the conversation sometimes, right? That what happens after you die? What happens? You have dead relatives, right? What do you think happens? If they have dead parents, what do you think happened to like this is a serious issue? And usually when someone has lost a parent, these are things that generally think about. Um, in the case of my friend, he accepted Islam after his mom passed away. He started thinking about what's happening, what happens after that, and then one thing led to another, and he became Muslim. Right? Obviously, hidayah is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but going back to that point, rational arguments are just that rational argument. They're good, and you can almost make the argument that when Islam was being attacked by Greek philosophers, right, this was needed at the time. It was very important for scholars to come and defend the religion through this, and we're still kind of running on this, right? But that defense doesn't necessarily mean that you have to always bring it into the discussion, and that's what will make someone a Muslim, you know, and you have done your job. Okay, cool. Cause and effect. So we believe every effect has a cause, just like how every action has a doer. Okay, and these causes cannot infinitely keep going backward, right? And the very fact that they infinitely cannot keep going backward leads us to believe that there has to have been a start to this domino effect, right? To this domino effect, going back to, and now science, as Sheikh Hamza says, science is giving you a gift. What is that gift? The Big Bang. Okay. Now, if someone tries to argue with you that we just infinitely keep regressing backward, one thing led to another, and just keep, even the scientists will be like, you're crazy, man, right? Like, we know the Big Bang, right? So we already believe, like now, society already believes that there was a start, okay? What was before that start? That's where the discussion either makes sense to you or doesn't make sense to you based on what side you come from, right? So there's this quantum fluctuation theory, right? That there was this essentially a pre-existing state of nothingness, right? Which one of you guys are studying physics? Yeah, am I making sense? What was before the Big Bang? But they say it was a state of nothing, right? There was nothing. Or there's a previous universe that collapsed. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Cycle of infinity universe. Interesting. I don't know that, but is that a legitimate opinion? Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. Gotcha. Well, so the nothingness is pretty easy for us to count, right? So you can't have something come from nothing. That makes no sense. Or you concede that the nothing was nothing, it was something. And then you have to now address where did that something come from, right? Now, if you were to go back to what he's saying, that there were another universe that collapsed in itself and then create, okay, so these universes collapsing on each other, there still had to have been a start, right? There had to be a start of energy. There had to be a start of something, right? It wouldn't make sense. Especially if you think that this is all still part of creation within time and space. Within time and space. Universe itself was internal in what sense? Oh, eternal. Okay. Eternal backwards, you mean? Yeah. So that one is, yeah. So this is a classical argument in the books. It's hard to make that argument um, in the context of today. I'm not saying it's not a relevant argument, but when you try to speak to someone saying that who made this thing this way, like who assigned it the color, who assigned it, that argument is very difficult for the average person to understand. Would you agree? Yeah, yeah. What's the science of metaphor? Okay, okay, okay. And it just infinitely goes until it just keeps infinitely going. So will the sniper ever get permission to fire? Right? Correct. Yeah. So that would apply to the example of universes still colliding on each other and then creating more universes because you're still going to need a start point at the end of the day, right? And um, going back to how, um, sorry, I forgot the point. Just go to the next slide, and then we'll yeah. So Allah Subhanahu wa Taala actually talks about these arguments, right? Some of them sometimes are very emotional arguments, right? But that should teach us, right? If Allah Subhanahu wa Taala only resorted to rational arguments, right? Then we could have been like, oh yeah, maybe we can just rationally convince people. But if you notice in the Quran, rational arguments are there, they have their place, but they're not the majority of the time, right? A lot of it is takhweef, a lot of it is warning, a lot of it is inval, right? In in one of the ayahs, Allah says, أَوَلَمْ يَتَفَكَّرُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, okay? Do they not ponder on about their own selves? Do they not ponder about their own bodies and own existence? ما خلق الله السماوات والأرض وما بينهما إلا بالحق وأجل مسمى. That Allah hasn't created the heavens and the earth except except with a serious purpose, okay, and at an appointed time. وإن كثيرا من الناس بلقاء ربهم لكافرون. That many people, yet many people uh, end up denying the fact that they will meet their Lord, right? And then as the ayah that you see up there, أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون. So this ayah is actually mentioning three examples without mentioning the third. How? Were they created from nothing? Okay. Like some of us claim the Big Bang happened from nothing, right? Nothing, something. Or were they their own creators, right? And if it's neither, it's a rhetorical question. If it's neither, then what's the third possibility? That they were created, right? So they were created. So, uh, the next slide, is Big Bang. Okay, so we talked about a Big Bang, with the design theory. The rest will continue next class. Where are we on time? 7:51. Okay, we can do questions for the next 8 minutes if there are questions. Sure. So let's start with the crowd first. If there's any questions, we'll come back. Yeah, yeah. Okay, correct. Yeah, isn't true. Correct. Yes. It's a theory. Okay. Right. Mhm. Fair. They talk about it as if this is an established fact in the scientific world, and like, right? Yeah, which is not. Yeah, correct. Yeah, yeah. It's the most plausible explanation they've run upon, and that could, as a source of truth, basically. Yeah. So the way you can do it is you make the you don't bring the Big Bang first, right? You present your case first that there had to have been a start, and the scientific community also accepts that as a plausible, as the most plausible definition as well, or understanding as well, right? So you're relying on your argument, and you're helping it with Big Bang instead of instead of landing on the Big Bang, and then your argument feels like a secondary thing at that point. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. 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 Again, kind of re-emphasizing what I said earlier. I really, really do think and believe that you're not you, people accept Islam with like 100 different things, right? Each of them playing a part, each of them having its weight, right? So I mean, the Big Bang isn't going to convince someone in and of itself. It's just one of those things, um, but it's still good to research. Yeah, of course. Yeah, contradiction based on your cultural context. There's no inherent. Yeah, yeah, correct. Yes, yeah, yeah. It cannot be something that's completely absurd. Like, like for example, to give you an example, um, in our context, this is probably the easiest example. A man can marry 4 wives is something that doesn't sit well with most of us in our context who's grown up in the West, right? But try it 250 years ago, that was probably the norm, right? What we're saying would probably be absurd to them. And that's a very cultural, environmental situation that has affected the way, right? Yeah, or your social context, your cultural context. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. Aslan, what's the truth? Is the mind capable enough to decipher if polygamy is the truth or non-polygamy is the truth? Is it? Like, is it right? If Kantians are arguing that morality and stuff is just kind of like a necessary thing, so the societies can operate, then okay, then how do you land on this being barbaric, for example? Right? Well, what's to argue? What who can what's stopping someone from arguing that monogamy is not barbaric? Right? I'm not saying either of them is barbaric, but I'm just saying like how do you land on which one's the truth? We're affected completely solely on this cultural understanding of the truth. Yeah, yeah. I haven't gone into that. We're gonna touch upon it. Yeah, I'm gonna spend too much time on it. Okay, so let's narrow it down to one. Yeah. Okay, so it's not interesting. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So our our understanding rationally evolves that two things cannot be in the same place. But the way we say it is two things cannot occupy two different volumes. Sorry, one thing cannot occupy two different volumes. You know, yeah. E sound. I think you're talking about takhweef. Takhweef is from like khawwafa yukhawwifu. It means to fear, to put fear. Neither. Indar. Yeah. Indar is to like warn, warning, warning. So warning is sort of lesser. Takhweef is like scaring someone, like they will burn in hell. That's takhweef. Indar is like the day of judgment is coming. Prepare for it. And those are more than the rational arguments in the Quran. Rational arguments in the Quran, like they're not as many as the mentions of hellfire, the mentions of adab. Obviously, there's mentions of Jannah and everything else. So the rational arguments of the Quran, they're relevant. For the Quran's coming with them, of course, they're relevant. But when you look at how many they are versus how many of the other ones there are, then it kind of gives you like where the emphasis should be in your dawah as well, right? Some of us get obsessed with the rational stuff and we never talk about anything else, right? And that I think that harms dawah more than it does. They couldn't reconcile. Yeah, everything. Yeah, it didn't make sense. Correct. Yeah, 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 yeah. In their case, there's just too many gaps for them to reconcile, and it didn't work, right? And their enlightenment came after they left separated church and state. Whereas we can make the argument that our enlightenment came with the advancement of religion, not after we ditched. That's if we claim that our nations have ditched religion. If we can claim that, I don't think that's 100% truthful. Um, yeah, we good. Sure, sure, sure. Um, I see your point, but of in the case of Islam, future predictions were part of the mu'jiza the Prophet ﷺ came with. And we see those mu'jiza happening sort of one by one right away. Right? Whether you want to say like when the Prophet ﷺ warns how if you live long enough you'll see a lot of division, and that same Sahabi lives till 75 Hijri. 75 Hijri is when Abdullah bin Zubair was killed. And before that, we have the battle of between Ali radiallahu anhu and Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. We have the battle of, we have the Khawarij coming into the scene. We have all this. So that's like one of the predictions. Uh, when you look at the prediction of Rum, Kulibati Rum, right? Uh, those are kind of proofs that, especially since the religion was reported right away, it wasn't like 20 years after or 300 years after. Yeah, yeah, never. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you see and you see how, in our case, there's a weakening of Islamic scholarship, and that kind of correlates with the weakening of our country. Obviously, colonization plays a huge role in this. Yeah. Any other questions? Nothing? Sallallahu alaihi wasallam.